Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm speaking all the way from Paris, and today I'm speaking to a ex-farmer from the Free State, Perry Feldman. Welcome.
Hi, Friso. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for having me on this program.
Yeah, so Perry, the purpose of today's talk is to get people to talk about title deeds in South Africa. And South Africa has a very long history of expropriating people from their land, but I think that history is often misunderstood. It's especially misunderstood in the way public discourse runs today. And we take for granted that there are millions of South Africans that simply do not own the property that they live on. Can you maybe give us a brief outline of the history of expropriation in South Africa? And then we take it from there to the Khaya Lam project.
Look, and I get a cold shiver down my back whenever I think about it. But Salt Blakkies, and you would know who Salt Blakkies
I
was.
would know. I know it is, yeah.
Yeah, Salt Blakkie in 1913, when the Lands Act was promulgated, wrote so sublimely and so heartrendingly, sadly, that today I'm a stranger in my own land.
Yeah.
Because but with a stroke of a pen, most black people were stripped of their rights to own land. And I say most because over the period of another 20, 30 years, there were various amendments to the Act which made it more and more encompassing. And up t- this wrong has never been corrected. It's never been put right. Where with a stroke of a pen, the present day government could say everybody who can prove that they have the right to live on a certain piece of ground, or the right to live on a certain earth, or right to have be on this farmland, and I'm still there at the moment, we will recognize and immediately pass the necessary laws to do so. It has never been done. The reasons are, we could speculate forever about why it's never been done. But it's in the background of that I, as a farmer, always knew that if we didn't do something about land reform, and I don't mean land expropriation, I mean land reform, then this country is on a steep decline.
So
And
when we,
sorry,
I want to get just still a little bit on the history. I know there's not a history channel, it's not the purpose, but
no,
just
that's
for
fine.
the international audience to understand. In 1913, the South African government passed what was called the Native Land Act. And effectively, it allocated at the time the majority of the fertile land to the white population. And so it was the precursor to what would later become the Homelands Project. So the Homelands Project, the idea was we create Bantustans in the country, which was areas comparable to the US nature reserves, to where the black people would stay. As time went on, these reserves would double in size, and the project would be chased down with ideological fervor. Within South Africa itself, there were areas that contradicted this, areas where black people historically farmed, owned land, often called black spots, for example, and these were sort of seen as a blight on the apartheid grand design scheme. And the government at the time would say, let's try and remove these people from their property and we put them in the homelands. We try and resettle them. There was a massive resettlement program. At the same time, there were many black people living around the urban areas, which were later called townships. They're largely a legacy of the mines of South Africa and also the farming community. And they lived on the land at the time. But until today, we don't know why. There's a long history, there's lots of speculation. The people who live in South Africa, modern South Africa, around the cities, do not own title to their land. Is that a correct reflection of the history?
It's a fairly correct reflection of the history, and uh, yes, it's complicated, but that's a very simplified version of what we have now. And just to add to what you were talking about, the Bantustans, this is the Bantustans, which comprise 13% of the land mass of this country, was the only area in which a black South African could have citizenship,
Yeah.
and where they could have voting rights in their own area. In a white area, they could not have no, there were no voting rights. And in fact, there's this. a seminal book that was written by Van Onselen. It's called Casmain, the land, uh, the life of Casmain, and this chronicles what happened from the 1913 Lands Act, what happened to Casmain and his family over the years through the Bantustan areas and up to about 20 years ago.
Mhm.
How people who were independent, proud farmers became became servants to white people in effect because they had no way of building up an asset like the white people did.
Right. And even on the homelands area, my understanding was the black population could not really own property. Often it was allocated to the chiefs, meaning you had a feudal system de facto created. They would own the land, and we see legacies of that in the Nkuyama Trust, for example, but also other regions of the country. So essentially, what the laws at the time did is it um, condemned the majority of the population of the country to servitude. In other words, they could work on the land, but they could not own the land.
But then we also got to understand, and you mentioned the Ngonyama Trust. The Ngonyama Trust was developed, came from the Zulu homelands, where the Ngonyama Trust was given the title deeds. The king was given the title deeds to the homelands in order to have our 1994 elections. This is unlike any other tribal area. In the other tribal areas, the chiefs do not have a title deed. It's all state land still. Ngonyama Trust is the only one which has a title deed, and it was in the king that just died recently. It was in his power to give every single member, every subject of his, a title deed to the land that he lived on if he wanted to, but he
Okay.
never did. So
So
we must also be very careful where
mm,
we apportion guilt and blame.
I think the purpose is it's history is what it is. Nobody can go back and change the clock. But the reality of today is that many people in South Africa, in tribal areas, in the homelands areas, and around the cities, do not own title for the land. And the question is, how do you fix that? Like, how do you give them property rights? And I think this is where your conversation comes in. So, this is when I start introducing the Khaya Lam project. You told me 6 years ago, and I think I'll let you take over from there.
Well, we started a little bit before then, but remember what, remember when you look at me, you're looking at who the members of the Free Market Foundation are,
Mm,
and we all old white apartheid relics. It's
yeah,
quite simple. And so, how do you present a project to a municipality which is in the main ANC run and convince them that you're doing this because it's the right thing to do, and not because there's something that you want to you're going to profit out of it. I always tell people I do profit out of it. Yes, I'm building a future for my children and my grandchildren who are still in this country. That's my motive, and I hope to profit by that, because if my children and grandchildren live in a prosperous country, everybody else will be prosperous. There's nothing stopping them.
all right.
So this is always this was our biggest problem, was to convince an ANC municipality, which by its very nature would be represented by black people, that these old whiteys weren't looking to cheat somebody.
Yeah,
So what helped, and I'm going to say this up front, and this is also one of these things that that people say, why do you talk about it? But it's a fact that if it wasn't for Ace Magashulu, who is the Secretary General of the ANC, and who is in deep trouble at the moment in terms of he's been charged with various charges of corruption. If it wasn't for our relationship with Ace between 90 and 94, this project would not be where it is today.
right.
So
So yeah, it adds nuance and complexity. And look, it's not for me to judge Ace Magashule. I think the courts will do that very soon,
the
anyways.
courts will do that for sure.
But
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 what
in
we
this
have to,
aspect, we must say that he assisted you with
yes,
getting the project launched.
and it also proves the old adage that not everybody is you're not there's good parts to everybody, and power corrupts, and power is a horrible thing.
Yeah.
So what the relationship that we had between 1994, because he comes from Paris and we lived in Paris and we were members of the peace committee and he was a member of the peace committee, and to a large extent we managed to keep the peace in Paris because of our interaction. And when it came to launching Khaya Lam, the thought was that where do we have allies?
Okay.
And we thought we had an ally in ACE, and it proved to be correct because allies ACE saw the value in the project. He saw the value for his people in the project, and it's very telling that in with our first title handing over ceremony in October of 2013, ACE was present, and he made the point. He says it's 100 years since the Native Lands Act was passed. He says, and here we are handing back title deeds to people in townships. And that has
Right.
never something that is highly unusual.
And I want to add to that. Herman Mashaba at the time, he wrote an article, I think it was in Business States, but I think it was 2030 when he wrote 100 Years of Poverty. And he was
Yes,
referring to the Native Land Act. And he was the chairperson of the Free Market Foundation. So
yes,
I just want to make a point. This is not an ANC advert at the moment. You know, there's lots of people with lots of interest here. And as you say, the common interest in South Africa at the moment is people need to appreciate that there's millions of black people around our cities that do not own title to their property. And my understanding is they own their property, but they don't have the title deed. Can you maybe explain that?
okay. So now let's get down to what they call the basics. We lucked out. We started in the Free State
Yeah.
and in Paris, and the Free State just happened to be the most verkrampte, the most right-wing province of the four provinces that we had at the time. So where the Cape would have spent money on housing, on council housing, subsidized housing, the Free State spent very, very little on subsidized housing. So where to where titling in the Cape is very, very complicated, in the Free State it's dead simple. 70% of people in the Free State have built their own houses with their own money on property that is owned by the municipalities. Now we're
Okay.
not talking about what we would call reconstruction and development houses, or RDP houses, where the state builds a house and gives it to somebody. These are people that spent their money, their own personal money, and built it with their own hands. And they died not being able to bequeath it to anybody because they didn't have a title deed. They could go to an office and say, I want my right to live here, my permission to occupy. I want this to be in the hands of my children. But any official could change the record and dispossess somebody. That's how easy it is, because it's not these permissions to occupy are not enshrined in any register.
Yeah.
That can't be changed. So what happened to us in Paris, and Paris is part of Ngwati, which consists of 5 towns in the area, is that we found that we could also use an act, the upgrading of the Land Tenure Rights Act of 1991, which you might have heard of,
Yeah.
which was passed by the then nationalist government, which said that an occupant of an earth in a township, if they have a permission to occupy, they are now the title holder of that piece of ground. But they were silent on how this happens. The act is
Right.
silent on how it happens. So, in theory, you could go to the deeds office and present your permission to occupy and say, "Now give me a title deed." In practice, it doesn't work that way because we're stuck to the Western convention of having a deed register, and who can do this work? Only a conveyancer can do it. So it becomes an expensive process.
So,
So
so what is blocking people from owning their own property is a legal process that is actually just gone bureaucratic,
yes, but it's also a legal process that enshrines a right that cannot be tampered with.
right?
Remember, that's very, very important. It's a right that nobody can just change. No official can just change it. It's
Right.
in a deed registry which is inviolate, and our deed registry is inviolate. Nobody, there's never been any hint of tampering with our deed registry. So the access to the deed, and that's where Khaya Lam lucked out, because we found there was a local lawyer who said, "Why aren't we using this act?" He says, "Because there we can force the municipality to sign off on the land. They cannot withhold it. They also, and in South Africa, I don't know what it's like in other countries, before you can transfer a property, the local authority has to give you a clearance,
Yeah.
a rates clearance. In other words, you can't owe anything on the property. You have to have your water and lights paid up in full. But because you're not the owner of the property, there are no rates and taxes outstanding. And that's the other issue.
Right.
So what the agreement we have with every municipality is that if a resident owes money to the municipality, the municipality doesn't write it off. It just gets transferred from the tenant who has the permission to occupy to the title holder, who is the same person. And then you're talking about two entities that can talk to each other and discuss how we're going to pay this off.
Right. But it doesn't seem to me as if that's a it should be a very complicated process, and yet it is.
Well, we've simplified it, and that's why we can do it for such a low price, and that's why we have conveyancers who have bought into it, because it's a numbers game. If you do one, it costs a fortune. If you do 100, it becomes an assembly line, and
Right.
that's what we try to do. So we have conveyancers who bought in, and also the conveyancers that we work with are fully aware of the fact that we all have a debt. White people have a debt, and there's ways and means of paying it off without without putting yourself at a disadvantage. So this is how we do it. We have white conveyancers who are happy to do this work for us at a cut rate, and we don't. And if they don't do it at this rate, we just don't use them to do the work. We have lots of people who want to do the work, but they're asking us a rate that we won't pay. We can't afford to pay that. So we have people who have the good of the country at heart, and they also are not doing themselves any harm. Understand? This is very clear,
Yeah.
very carefully. The last thing we want is pro bono work, because then it doesn't get done properly.
Right.
I'm dead
So
scared of pro bono work because I've got no handle on anybody.
yeah, I mean, people do things for free. If it's easy come, easy go, basically.
Absolutely. I
So
don't like.
I want to understand the scope of the problem. How many South Africans, I mean, obviously you have to give an estimate, currently live on land which they technically own, okay, but they don't have title for it.
Okay, now it's a thumb suck, but we estimated between 5 and 7 million people. It could be 10 million. We don't know. But remember that what we're including is all the tribal land
Hmm.
where people live, and they live with there's no private ownership. They are at the whim of a chief. There are plenty good chiefs, and they don't become a problem. But the fact remains that if you don't have a title deed, you cannot leverage your asset.
Yeah,
Fernando
it's
de
just
Soto, the Peruvian economist, has had this distinction between live capital and dead capital. Now, dead capital is capital that you own, like that brochure that you showed on your screen, Mrs.
yeah.
Matupi, who was 99 years old when she got her title deed. She owned it in inverted commas, but she couldn't use it as a loan for a kid to go to university. Her
I want to
granddaughter.
quickly show people the story. Can you maybe give us the story here? So you say this is a woman that she was 99 years old. Where was it? Which town?
She lives in Tumahole in Parys, which is the township in Parys.
Okay.
And she
Yeah.
applied for a title deed when she was 99 years old. Now, to understand the scope of this project, you don't need to be a Johan Rupert or a Christo Visa or a wealthy person to be part of this project. This title deed was sponsored by a lady by the name of Tertia Cook, whose brother lives in the UK, and she wanted to buy him a birthday present. and
Okay.
he wanted for nothing. So she bought a title deed for Mrs. Matupi in in his on his behalf. So when we issue the title deed, there's a cover sheet that says this is the earth number, this is the title deed number, and who the sponsor is. So the
Right.
sponsor on the cover sheet of Mrs. Matupi's title deed is Tertia Cook's brother. And we had a presentation ceremony, and Tertia was there, and she handed the title deed to Mrs. Matupi personally. There were 152 odd new title deed holders at this function, and she asked Mrs. Matupi. This happened in October. When do you turn 100? And she said in January. She said, "Well, I'm going to give you a party,"
Wow.
and that's what Tertia did. Now, this is very important to understand. This is not this Matupi isn't just Earth, whatever it is. It's not a number. Mrs. Matupi is Mrs. Matupi, a human being who she and her husband lived for 35, 40 years in this house, which they built up with their own hands. It's a very modest house, but it's her house. But
Yeah.
it wasn't her house until she was 99 years old.
Wow.
And it's very, very humbling when you understand we never knew this insecurity. If we built a house, we knew we had a title deed. Mrs. Matupi never had the security, neither she nor her husband. And her husband died before he got the security.
Wow.
So the picture that you saw there was taken with Mrs. Matupi in her home on her 100th birthday, and Tertia brought a cake with
That's
100
the.
years on it, and we had a party, and it was
Hmm.
lovely.
Wow. So you say the woman at 99 years old, and when she received the title deed, what did it mean for her? Because as you say, it's more than just a number.
It's more than just a number. Her comment was, "Now I can sleep at night." Now,
Wow.
put yourself in her shoes. Her life savings are in this asset that her Nanda de Soto is saying is dead capital, and he's 100% correct because she could do nothing with it. She couldn't even leave it to somebody in her will because it's not her property. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden she got a title deed, and that asset now is life capital. She can bequeath it to somebody. If she wanted to, she could take a loan to open a business, but at her age, that's not what she was going to do.
Yeah.
But we have another person, and I think I sent you her story as well, um, Mrs. Ramakwazi, who she's unfortunately died since, but she was in her 40s. She was a single mother, and she had rooms that she'd built with her own money, and she let. Yes,
It's
that's
this.
that's her.
That's the one over there. Sorry, I'm
Yes.
having a difficulty zooming into this. Oh, there we go. Now the software works. See,
Mm.
that's the lady. So what was her story?
She had the stand, and she'd built rooms, and she wanted to that she let and she lived in a house. She had a partner, and she had a 13-year-old daughter, and she vowed that her daughter would never know the insecurity that she had, and she built these rooms. She had seven, and they became nine. They had rooms. They had a bathroom. And then she built a store next door. And she said, I want a title deed so that nobody can ever take this away from her. No uncle or aunt can say, "You're too young, it's not yours."
Right.
And that's what she got, a title deed. She died 2 or 3 years later, but her daughter never lost her asset. No matter
So,
what happened, the asset was still hers.
but, this is the point that Hernando de Soto made. Is the importance of title deeds. It spans generation. Worldwide we're having a big debate about inequality and about, all the things economists talk about. I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert on it. But the point that De Soto made is that you cannot create a middle class if you don't equip people with property. I mean, throughout the world, whether it was England, United Kingdom, South Africa, mainly for whites at the time, United States, all the quote unquote capitalist countries, the free world, had a form of title deed. And it's the only way to lift people out of poverty. And, as you say, yet in South Africa, it's 4 to 10 million people. We don't have an exact number on it. that are still living. They are living on land, but they cannot own their own property. So effectively, they are trapped in poverty just because of a legislation.
Yes, it's as simple as that. And how do we build a middle class? Now you can say that, but so many people are poor. How are they ever going to get themselves out? Well, you can't. You have to take the view that at some stage a member of the family is going to be able to earn a decent living and lift the family up with it. And this is and there are so many people that we've seen that we've spoken to who speak about having escaped the poverty trap. Now, the poverty traps, this is a word we don't understand either.
Yeah,
It's a trap. You can't get out of it. How do you get out of it? You've got to use something. The easiest thing, the best thing that you have is the home that you live in, converting that into life capital. A very good example is the Minister of Housing, of Human Settlements in the Western Cape is a guy by the name of Tertius Simmers.
yeah,
Now, he lived in the Cape Flats. His family lived in the Cape Flats. And we had a handing over ceremony in Grabouw, which is near Caledon. It's about 60, 70 kilometers away from Cape Town. And just to give the foreigners some perspective. And the and he was at the handing over ceremony. We didn't invite him, but he makes a point of being wherever there is a title deed to be handed over. Okay, he's a politician. It's
yeah,
good publicity. No arguments. But I went to him and I said to him, thanks for
yeah,
being here. We didn't invite you. He says, you don't have to invite me. He says, this is what I do. This is the best thing I can do. He said, and then he told us his story. He said his father received a title deed. They were in the Cape Flats. They got a house and they got a title deed in 1994. With that title deed, his father took out a loan to educate Tertius. Tertius went to university and he became an achiever. And with that achievement, he's pulled his whole family out of the poverty trap. At the same ceremony, there's a lady, Benita Peterson, who is the housing officer in the Theewaterskloof municipality, which is where Grabouw is.
mhm,
And she said, but hang on, I've also got that kind of story. Now, I didn't ask for these stories, they happened. She says, my mother lived on the Cape Flats, and Nelson Mandela in 95 or 96 came there, and at a mass meeting, he said, you're all going to get title deeds and you're all going to get a washing machine.
Why a
Now,
washing machine?
why washing machine? So Benita says her mother didn't really worry about the washing machine, but the minute she got a title deed, she took out a loan to educate Benita, and she went and bought her own washing machine. Benita is now a housing officer. Her mother lives with her in a house in Caledon, and an aunt lives in her house on the Cape Flats. Now, these are just two stories.
Mm,
So how many other people have escaped the poverty trap? I cannot think. I cannot think of a better example of how you escape the poverty trap by giving somebody a tool. It's the old parable. You don't want to give somebody fish, you want to give them the fishing rod.
yeah, but there are politicians. Obviously, they're politicians. Well, we're just people who say, but if you give poor people property, they're going to blow it. What do
You
you
know,
say to that?
I want to hit them, quite simply. It's got to be the most paternalistic attitude that I've ever heard of. Remember, they won't say that about a white person. And I always ask them, so why do you say this about black people? Why do you underrate the intelligence of a poor person? That
Yeah,
poor person has got the same feelings as you or I have, the same realities as you or I have. If he's a drunkard, he's going to be a drunkard, whatever his color is, and he's going to blow it. But what's the percentage? The percentage is 0.0000 something.
yeah,
99.999% of people are going to use this as their store of value, their asset. They're going to want to give it to their children. Going to want to leverage it in some way or other. If Mrs. Matupi wasn't alone when she said, now I can sleep at night.
yeah,
The other thing she said, she held this piece of paper up and she said, now this is mine. Now that's telling. Something that again I never had to live with. But to say that the
Yeah,
house that I live in that I've paid for, now it's mine. It's nobody can take it away from me. That's got to be the most telling thing that you can say.
yeah, no, that's true. And you know, ironically, you find it from even the black politicians saying it of their own people. I mean, I
Absolutely.
won't name all the names, but you can hear just hear in Parliament about the land debate. When Ramaphosa a few years ago suggested that in the land debate, black people will own title, he was attacked by some of the opposition saying, no, the banks are going to take the money, the land, or the black people don't know how to handle it. We, the state, must be the paternalistic father to handle it.
Now, interesting. Another angle to this thing about the banks, and Capitec started. Capitec is one of the bigger banks. Is one of the five biggest banks in South Africa, and they do unsecured lending. Now, if you've got a title deed, it just improves the boxes you tick, but they won't take out a bond. FNB are doing the same thing now. They want to give loans to people who have title, but they don't want to give you a loan. They are working on the basis that you're a responsible individual, as most people are.
Mm.
And if you've got an income stream and you can service the debt, you will service the debt. Having a title deed is just an added box that you tick and to keep the bank happy.
And
Because then they know
it
that
obviously
the
brings
person,
down the interest rate. You know, it makes it
yes,
easier.
and you have a fixed address. They know where to find you. You're not transient. It makes a massive difference. There are all these little aspects that most people just take for granted. Having a fixed address. Now, you say we have a fixed address. It's obvious, but it's not so obvious.
Yeah. And then what is the consequences of not having I think the SOTA called it a legal identity, you know?
Yeah, it's we're working in a place called Edenville, where can you imagine a town that doesn't have an ATM?
Not really. Even for South African, I can sort of, but not really.
Well, this is the first town that we've been to where there wasn't an ATM. I mean, there
Yeah.
might not be a bank branch, but there's not an ATM. There's no taxis going from the township to the commercial hub because there is no commercial hub. So people say to us, "Well, why are you giving people title deeds there?" And we've got one company, Better Bond, who is a bond originator, who is happy to do so because ultimately you have to hope that the seed that you plant, that the fact that there's a title deed will allow an entrepreneur somewhere in that society to say, hang on, guys, this is not the end of the world. We don't have to be the back of beyond. We are going to become something. And with a title deed, I can do it. And why would people, we don't go knocking on doors and saying, hey, do you want a title deed? We put out the word. If you don't have a title deed and you want one, come and apply. And people stream to our office or wherever the office is for that place.
How long is your backlog at the moment?
We don't have a backlog at the moment because our backlog is ironing out the hitches with the municipalities.
Okay.
We've got sufficient money at the moment to do well over 30,000 title deeds, and we've already processed. We are completed about 11,000. So we've got money, but we've got projects where we're going to do 2,000 title deeds, but it takes the municipality a while to get their act together because in the Western Cape, for instance, it's not so easy. In the Free States, it's easy, but we still have to. We've got to. Can you imagine that we have to convince municipalities to be part of this process? At this stage,
I do, having dealt with government and municipalities before, I actually believe you. So
but
it's
without
but
track record, where we show where we operate, the good
yeah.
that we've done, where people still look at us as if it's against their interests to give their people title deeds. It's amazing. It's something we discuss and we say, how can it be? How can any sane person not be rushing to us and say, please come to our town?
Yeah. It will obviously bring stability to the town, but because as you say, it helps alleviate poverty. Look, it's not the only solution to poverty, but it
Not
is
the only
definitely
solution, definitely not.
is
but it's,
definitely the first step upwards.
we always talk about the foundation. This is one of the key parts of the foundation to prosperity in this country. Without titling, without tradable tenure, tradable security,
Yeah.
you cannot build a country. And this now we go on to also what happens to farmers who get put onto a piece of ground without tenure. They're at the mercy of whom? They cannot raise funds. They have to look for a mentor. They have to look for somebody who will stand security for them because the government puts them onto ground and doesn't give them even a long lease, which is tradable. So we hear the story, black farmers aren't successful. Many are, but a lot aren't because you set them up to fail.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to David Coltart on this show 2 nights ago
Yeah,
about Zimbabwe, and he said to me, well, the problem with the expropriation in Zimbabwe, the way land reform was done, if you can even call it that, was that the government kept the land. They still don't have title in Zimbabwe in many areas.
absolutely.
And, people don't, it's something that is so trivial. If you live on a land, you should probably own it. It's not complicated. And yet that very basic thing goes missing. And at the same time, you find politicians and ministers and God knows who making all kinds of promises of utopias, but none of it will work if there's no title for the land.
It cannot work. I mean, look at the tribal areas. A very good case when if you had a drive into northern, what we would call the northern KZN, you travel from what we would call the white farming area, and all of a sudden the landscape changes. And how does it change? It changes to an eroded area. It changes to overgrazing. And and why would it be? I mean, people aren't stupid. They know if you degrade your ground, you don't have a future. But
Yeah.
why should I not graze my animals if the other people are grazing it? So where we have and this is part of the problem, where one's wealth is counted in numbers, and because there's no title, there's no point in having quality and not quantity.
Yeah.
Because you're not with less cattle, you're not going to get quality either because you can't look after your own piece of grazing. So immediately you see what happens, how this is degraded, how the landscape gets degraded, and there's no solution because there's no incentive for people to reduce the number of stock per hectare. No
And
incentive
that,
whatsoever. Why should there be? And unless you have a chief that says, guys, look, I don't want to give you title, but let's do something about we're going to give you rights to a certain area. To each person, you look after that area. You don't look after it, I'm taking it away from you. We haven't got there yet. And it's very, very sad because that the Northern Natal is a future breadbasket of the country. The Eastern Cape, the Northern Eastern Cape,
yeah.
that climate is equivalent to what we would have called in the old Eastern Transvaal, high yielding, good soils, high rainfall. But because of the land tenure problem, it doesn't reach anywhere near the potential that it does now. Now, Agri SA, I don't know if you know the story, but Agri SA has a program where they get what we would call subsistence farmers. In other words, generally in tribal areas, you get a hectare of ground,
Yeah.
a morgan. That's what you're allowed to work from the chief. And so people would produce on that enough to get enough maize to last them through till the next season. Agri SA launched a project in Mpumalanga and in the Eastern Cape where they gave people decent seed. They had tractors that would go from farm to farm. They had sprays, they had planters that would go from farm to farm. And the idea was that over 3 years,
Yeah.
you would build yourself up to where you could finance your own planting and be, and actually have disposable income. Now, Can you imagine not ever having disposable income, no matter what you've got, because you just can't produce enough produce to get disposable income? So they moved people from 1 year to 3 years to having disposable income, to somebody being able to say, I'm for the first time I'm sleeping in a bed.
Yeah.
I've got a fridge. Now it's such a no-brainer.
But it's, I had a question from somebody before I came here about who is farming in the former Transkei area. And he says to me that he doesn't think title will ever happen there because the politicians are using it as a means of carrots and sticks. Is it possible in even the former homelands area to register title?
At the moment, it's not, but we can't see, and we would love to be able to do this. We
Yeah.
just haven't. We were actually going to start looking at it at the beginning of last year, and then COVID intervened, and things have just not come back to where you can do these things easily. But we were looking for a chief who was amenable to talking about it, and in terms of his own self-interest, because if it's not in the chief's interest to do so, why should he do so? So we wanted to look at what was happening in the chief's area and say to him, okay, this is what you're getting at the moment, and
Yeah.
your people don't have tradable security. Let's find a form of security. It has to be something that the banks recognize. And let's work out a way, and it can be a qualified title deed. There are lots of ways of skinning a cat.
No.
So, and then let's do something so that individual farmers can borrow money and whatever, and there would be a built-in royalty for the chief, but everybody would gain. It'd be a win-win situation, where at the moment everybody is scratching a living. We're looking in the just north of Pretoria at a certain area where possibly there are chiefs that would look at something like that. Now we have to crack one chief. It has to happen sometime. I just
Yeah.
hope it's a lifetime.
So if there's a chief listening here today on his YouTube from his farm, he can contact Perry. And I mean, but here's the thing, the argument though for the chiefs, as you say, it's self-interest. It is not in the interest of himself to see his people live in poverty. Okay, and here you have a recipe to help people escape poverty. Look, I'm not making the claim that title deeds is the only thing that alleviates poverty.
No,
Of
it's not.
course, you have education. Of course, you have all the other aspects that come with it. But it is one of the fundamental basis of getting out of poverty. And it's feasible. So if there's a chief listening, by all means, please go contact Perry so he can he can register title deeds there.
But you know what you speak about. So a title deed is not the only answer. Obviously, you need mentoring. You need knowledge. Now, Agri SA does this. There's a group called PALS which started in series,
Yeah.
and this is what they do. They open up bureaus sort of in different areas, and they've got people that would act like we used to have in the old days. We would call them an extension officer, who were
Right.
schooled in farming and could give them the technical advice. Now, we all think farming's dead easy. Farming's not dead easy. Farming is a
No.
difficult game. And if you don't know what you do,
Especially in South Africa where it's a dry climate, we don't have the water like the Europeans do.
yes, but even then, I mean, in the Eastern Cape, there's lots of water. There's
Yeah.
there's enough rain. But the point is that you've got to do things properly and scientifically. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. And the other thing that South Africa does not have, that Europe has, is there are no subsidies.
Yeah.
So you stand or fall by a market price. And that's why South African farmers are so resilient. Since about 95, when all the control boards were scrapped, South African farmers do not know what a subsidy is. We
Yeah.
are subject to all the vagaries of whatever person wants to dump, etc., etc.
I know in the past they used to say that the farmers aren't driving a Mercedes but a Subcedes.
Yeah, and how much is the owe on this Mercedes? So but you get other farmers.
Yeah.
There's a guy, Nick Serfontaine, near Kroonstad, who has got, and he works with the Jobs Fund, and he mentors cattle farmers. And how does he mentor them? people come to him and say, how do I make my farm better? They're on state land. He says, look,
Right.
this is the deal. He says, however many cattle you've got, he says, I'm going to take them all. I'll give you a market price for them because I've got an abattoir, and I'll slaughter them. We assess your farm, we assess its carrying ability, and we put onto your farm a bull, which I will supply, which is my property, and cows, which you will then pay for with the proceeds of what you've got, or you'll pay it off. Then, and we will work on the basis of, then we produce weaners. And I will buy the weaners from you at the market price. And so you will build up your herd. And it's such a success story. He's had about 600 farmers through his school already. He's mentored about over 100 farmers who are now, it's not perfect because they have no means of raising capital, but they now
Right.
have herds that are productive. Where before, for instance, a cow would calve every, 2 or 3 years. If the cow does not calve every year, if there isn't a 95% calving percentage, there's a problem, and he wants to know why it's happening. But
Right.
if you only go for numbers, then you don't worry about the calving percentage.
But just to bring it back to title deeds, so if those operations would get title deeds on top of what's
So
happening, it'll be even more of a success story. So
absolutely.
it's just, as you say again, it's dead capital. Coming back to Hernando de Soto's point, there's no reason for it to be dead capital either.
And the state is to blame because it's state ground.
Yeah,
But the politicians, and not all politicians are bad, but unfortunately, a very big percentage of them are.
it
And there
comes with
are
the
some,
job.
yeah, well, and there's some very, very good and competent officials, but they keep
Yeah.
on bumping their heads.
So
It's
so what
very
do we
sad.
need then, as because obviously this video will go out, it will now spread on social media. What should we do, going forward to try and fix this obvious problem? You say there's lots of people that simply don't have title deed to the land. It's not more complicated than this, okay? They don't own their property, but they stay there, and some of them have stayed there for generations. So some with a stroke of a pen, many of them, then maybe a bit of a bureaucratic mess. Many of them can own property, and then they can raise capital for the businesses or give it to their children, whatever they want to do if it's their property. I mean, what should people be asking? Should they ask their politicians? Should they ask the charities? Yeah, how do you solve this problem?
I think you solve it. We have to get a cross section of the population involved in this. It mustn't be one part of the population that's trying to help another part of the population. It's got to be a cross section of the population. There's got to be people who are committed to building up this country, and on a wide spectrum. We need farmers to say, guys, and be able to put pressure on government and on provincial governments to say, you cannot keep state land as state land if you want this country to go forward. We've got to find a way to get politicians motivated, and I don't know how you do this. Politicians motivated to say that this is not the way to go. And we've got to get this thing about expropriation without compensation out of the game. Because it's not only white people that'll be dispossessed, it'll be everybody. Because it's a
How
beautiful tool.
I know Leon Lois, who I know is watching, has made that point before, that probably the effects of expropriation without compensation is going to be more devastating to Black South Africans than white South Africans.
Absolutely.
Why would that be?
Because because in the main, white South Africans will be able to fight these things in the courts, where Black South Africans in the main don't have the resources to fight these things in the court. Remember, even if the bill had to be passed tomorrow, and it's very debatable whether it'll get passed, is it also it there are groups that are going to be holding this thing up in court forever.
Yeah.
But it creates uncertainty, and if there's one thing that an investor does not like, is uncertainty. If he's certain, we all the same. If we know what the rules are, we'll play by the rules or find a way around the rules. But don't keep changing the rules.
Yeah.
Then I don't know what to do. I need certainty, and this is what the EWC debate is doing, and it's doing it to housing. It's doing it to everything. Why should somebody buy a fancy property in where in the nice areas of Joburg or in Cape Town, and face the danger, maybe over a few years, that somebody decides, hang on, I'm going to expropriate that whole area because I want to make low cost housing there. Why should they do it? The odds of it happening are small, but there is a chance, and investors don't like that. Our expropriations, law allows for expropriation where the state needs to expropriate for the benefit of the public good. We don't need this other law. We don't need this uncertainty, and it's not the law. Understand, the law is bad enough,
Yeah.
but uncertainty is worse.
Right, and also the point being with expropriation or land reform, whatever there's different ways to skin a cat. But what you're proposing, and then what I also propose, is that the most just way of doing it would be to transfer title to people. It's as we said, the black population 1913 were deprived of their land. Okay, that's historical. We can't do anything about history. Today, many people live around the cities. They don't own land there. Why can't those people just have land? Why can't they have tenure? I don't see unless the politicians would like to control them. But I don't see the counter argument to that.
You know what's interesting is, and if you've looked at if you've been in South Africa, you would see this. We've got informal settlements that are all over the place.
Yeah.
But so many of these informal settlements have got Eskom pay-as-you-go meters.
Yeah.
Which means that Eskom, you can say what you like about Eskom, but Eskom accepts the fact that there's a customer there.
Right.
And they're giving them a prepaid point, and somewhere on a map, that point has got a number. That prepaid meter's got a number. Why can't we make a leap of faith? Why can't we say, let's have a secondary deeds registry that we do on what's Bitprop based on? On
blockchain. Blockchain.
On blockchain. Yes. Why can't we have title deeds on blockchain? So it'll be a secondary deeds registry, but it'll still be a tradable security, and it'll be marked on a map that has been taken from the air, and it'll reside in blockchain, which nobody can mess with, and the banks accept it. I mean, we've spoken to banks. We know of banks that will accept that kind of tradable security. Why can we not do it?
Let's just understand this. Blockchain is currently being used to solve apartheid's inequality problems. It's quite remarkable.
But it's already happening. Rwanda's using it. The Philippines are using it. Why don't we do it here? Why can't we? It's not even expensive. But we have
there's your answer, because when it's expensive, it means the expenses goes to government, okay? And then governments again have control over carrots and sticks. And just on, you asked earlier, why don't the politicians change their mind, or the government? Well, it's simple. There's a very good book by Everett Rogers called The Diffusion of Information. And he makes the point that institutions never change unless public opinion changes. So unless the word gets out and enough South Africans realize, listen here, this thing is wrong. It's very easy to solve. It doesn't cost whites anything, really. I mean, it's one title deed you have to pay maybe per person. Win-win situation all over. We create wealth. We create prosperity. I find it very difficult to see the counter argument to this. Unless that mindset filters through, the situation won't change. It will be you and your charity, unfortunately. Charity is doing remarkable work, but I would like it to expand.
Look, there's no question, and that's why do we have these conversations? Because you have to. One has to work on the basis that at some stage lightning will strike. Somebody will hear it.
The light bulb will go on. Yeah.
Yes, the light bulb will go on. I mean, there must be a eureka moment, surely, when people will understand that if you don't create something where people can gain, why should they bother? Everybody, and it's got to be win-win. There mustn't be a loser in the process. But it doesn't matter if the state loses, because the state ultimately will win. We need taxpayers. How do we get taxpayers?
Make property, yes. So the state can win in that sense. Well, yeah. So everything is linked to property. I mean, property is fundamental, if not quintessential, to Western civilization, all civilizations, really. If you take a country without property, you've got North Korea. You should.
There's a lovely thing. If you take If you take a if you look at a Google photo of Korea at night, North Korea is black and South Korea is full of lights.
Yeah.
So
I would like to ask if anyone has questions, if they can ask you. And
yes,
then
please.
just on your charity itself, where do they find
It's not
out?
a
And
charity. Hang on.
since you're on blockchain, I mean, it's the first time a South African farmer is telling me about blockchain. I'm really impressed. Um,
No, but
can people donate and buy support title deeds in Bitcoin? Is it possible for us
you
to?
know, somebody asked me that there is a Luno exchange in Cape Town apparently,
Yeah,
and one I don't know how you do it. I'm too old. You know you're the right guy for that. You would know, but I could find out
okay.
and
So what I want to do is, because I'm going to have a conversation in the foreseeable future with Jeremy Kaufman, who's developing the online blockchain Odyssey platform. I'm
yes,
going to suggest to them that if they are serious about their blockchain and human rights, etc., that they try
absolutely.
and donate a little bit of money to your charity so we can get people title deed registered. And it has to go through Bitcoin. You know, everything now has to be blockchain.
No, and once we've got that, maybe we can convince the government that we don't need the Western style deeds registry. That a level just below that still gives security. It's good enough. And that if
Yeah.
they want, you see, the argument is always, guys, but how do we get an ambulance to that point over there? You talk to the people. Every
Mm.
single one of these informal settlements has got a sort of a, a, uh, a committee. And if you say to them, okay, now, guys, we're going to have to move that house, fine, show me where. Show me where you need to be. We'll move him. But
Yeah.
don't come there with a bulldozer and just move him. Then you're looking for trouble. And then we formalize informal settlements. If we don't do this, we're dead in the water. We cannot give everybody housing. It's impossible.
Mm. I'm going to read you one comment. One guy here says the government does not like blockchain. And by the way, blockchain is one word, as they cannot control it.
But they can't control a deed registry either. All we're
Right.
saying is remember that when you've got some form of tradable security, you can levy a tax on it. You cannot levy a tax if there's no tradable security.
Yeah,
Up to now, we've never managed to do that.
that's right.
And
I mean,
that's now one of our motivating factors when we present. We say, guys, remember you're dealing with a tenant now, and you want him to pay something, and he'll tell you, why should I? It's not mine. But if it's mine,
yeah.
then I'm prepared.
Have you given testimony of this in Parliament during the expropriation debate?
Yes, the FMF has, Leon Zoe has, and Tembet Norochungu has. They
And
have, and the people have listened. They've listened. Whether it's going to translate into them doing what we want them to do is another story. But they have listened. They've had a sympathetic ear.
it's interesting. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that I
One
think
thing,
it speaks to everyone as well. I mean, it's a very common sense thing, but again, people have to be aware of it before it becomes common sense.
but you see, remember my background.
Mm,
You've got to make a plan. If it doesn't, you got to make it work. How do you make things work? You only make things work if everybody can gain.
right.
Municipalities will gain if there's a tradable security. Individuals will gain if there's a tradable security. Where is there a loser? Show me the loser.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay. So just again, the organization, it's called Khaya Lam. That's correct. And how much, just on last point, how much does it cost any individual in, say, in rands, to support one title deed in South Africa?
2,600 rand is what it would cost in the Free State, because that's where it's easy.
Right.
If you had to
So
tell
it
me you want to do it in Cape Town, then I've got to look at see where it is and what it will cost there.
okay. So 2,600 rand. That's about, I think it's 100, depending on the exchange rate, but it's about 150 euros. Let me
Yeah,
work that out.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. Here we go. 100 and, yeah. No, it's actually 300. Price has gone up again. Okay. But anyways, around that, euros for one person to have a property in South Africa. And let's say you take a title deed and you register a house. How much is the house worth afterwards? Obviously, it depends on the area.
Okay, it depends on the area, but we take a general figure of between 120 and 140 in the Free State. Okay, let's work on the Free State. If you go to Grabouw, for instance, those houses are worth 2 to 300,000 rand. In the Free State, we're talking about houses that are worth between 120 and 150,000 rand average. Because remember, we give a title deed on the ground, not on the structure. So you can have a shack. We've given title deeds to people who've got shacks, and the reason they've got shacks is because not because they don't have money, but they're not prepared to spend money on something they don't own.
Right.
So
Um,
immediately it
mhm.
changes.
So
So
Leon asks me a question here. Leon Lowe, he says, you, please tell the story about the guy that went home with a bottle of brandy.
that's the guy in Argentina. He would in the favelas. They had exactly the same problem. We're not unique, and
Yeah.
because you don't own anything, so it comes the end of the week or the end of the month. What are you going to spend your money on? So you blow it, and this is where people think, "What? Well, if they people get drunk and just give their house away." So they would where the story is that instead of they buying a bottle of brandy, they would buy a bottle of can of paint because now there's something I've got to be proud of.
So yeah, but so that's the other thing though, is once people get property, they behave differently. They behave more responsibly. So
Absolutely.
if you live
You
in
know
a
what?
place that you don't own, you're gonna drink away your cash, right? If you
There's a
start
guy.
owning it, you start improving it. You start creating wealth.
Absolutely, there's a guy, a farmer in the Paris area, who titled all his farm workers who lived in the town on the basis that he says that if they own something, they won't burn it.
Yeah.
If you own something, why would you burn it? I mean, you'd be stupid. So people don't, because now people have a stake in the area. Why would they burn communal facilities if they are part of that communal facility?
So they're burning down what government has and they're keeping what they've got. It's very, very revolutionary.
So that's the, and I always remember that what he said. If you own something, you won't burn it. It's quite simple.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Yeah, just on the last point, I say to anyone who's listening here, if they think if they're from out of South Africa, if there's one charity they can organize, they can support, I would definitely suggest, Khaya Lam. Yeah, you guys do a lot of good work. And in this year, how many title deeds do you intend to transfer to people?
Well, we're very ambitious. We would like to say that we've got plans to do about between 7 and 10,000, but it's the capacity of the municipalities that sometimes puts a brake on what we do. But we've got a lot of projects in process, and
Right.
it's definitely not impossible.
And which areas of the country are you currently operating in?
We operate in the whole of the Western Cape,
Yeah.
the Eastern Cape, towns in the Eastern Cape, and the Free State. But not all. It depends where we have an agreement with the local municipality.
Right.
But
And if the
we can
local
just take,
municipalities would like to get involved, or if people can ask the municipalities, they can contact you directly?
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, we're busy. We've started with one municipality now, where if we could mobilize it properly, we could do 10,000 title deeds this year.
Right. And what does let's say you've got a municipality that hasn't heard of you yet, and now they listen to this video and they say, okay, it sounds interesting. We can give people land, then it's a no-brainer. It's win-win every way. What must they do afterwards? They make contact with you, and then what is the process? But how do you guide them?
We will. I will go. I will go meet with them and give them a
Yeah.
presentation and show them what we need. And what we need is what the municipalities have to understand is that they don't that there is no cost to the municipality,
Mm,
not a cent. But what we need from them is cooperation. We have to be able to use their facilities. We have to be able to use. They have to help us know where we have to go. There's no way that we ever go into an area and just sorry, and I just
not a problem.
there's no way that we can go into an area
Mm,
and walk around without having told the ward councillors, the town councillors, exactly what we're doing.
Right. And just to reiterate, you're politically neutral. You don't care, if it's Ace Magashule or Hammer Mashaba, you've worked with both of them before.
We work with everybody. We do not. It's interesting, in Ngwati, which is an ANC, it's sort of 80% ANC,
Mm,
with a little bit of EFF and a couple of DAs here and there. And we have an agreement with the mayor, and she sticks to it implicitly. She There is never any political when she speaks or the councillor speaks or when they come to handing over ceremonies. There's no party regalia. There's
mm,
no party. Nobody talks about a party affiliation. Nobody says it's the ANC that's doing this, and she sticks to it to a T. And that's the kind of relationship we have. We do the same thing in the DA municipalities. It's not about the DA or the ANC. It's about the people. It's as simple
right.
as that.
I've got a question here. Somebody asked, what happens when a property owner has bank debt and passes on? Now, my advice would be sequestrate yourself before you do that.
It's a normal thing. If there's no bond on the house, then the bank has got no claim to the house other than there's a claim against the estate. It's as simple as that. It's like would happen. It's a normal society. That's what happens.
Right. Um, then somebody asks here, where are the titles at present? So I guess implying that people have rights and why don't they have titles yet?
The properties belong to
Mm,
local municipalities, to province, and in the case of farm ground, mainly to the state. That's where, if there was a title deed, that's where they would reside. But there are no title deeds until they are passed to individuals.
right. Then
The
I've got
exception again is the Ngonyama Trust.
yeah, I think we can spend the last few, maybe just after the next question on the Ingonyama Trust. Somebody here asked, what if another person is living on a part of their land within the new claim land? So I assume, what if there's a dispute and there's two families that says both, listen, this was my land, and etc.
Disputes, we don't handle disputes.
Right,
Before we will pass a title deed, there has to be agreement if there are, children or whatever it is. There has to be agreement as to who owns the land. And we've passed title deeds to 5 people. If that's the way it has to be, that's the way it has to be. It's a recipe for disaster, but if that's what they want, that's fine.
but I think as soon as there's wealth involved, the people will quickly realize, listen, we have to cooperate, otherwise we don't win the lottery, because you're essentially giving people free cash,
Yes. No, but the ability.
the yeah, of free value, your free asset, let me put it that way rather.
Yeah. But
Okay,
it's their money to start with. We're just giving them the ability to use the money,
right.
which they
Then
do.
I've got a question on that somebody asked me on WhatsApp of the Ngoyama Trust. I can never pronounce it properly. The what is the story there? I mean, I know Goodwill Zwelithini just died. They're going to announce a new king. Have you tried anything with a Zulu house? I know it's a difficult political situation.
We have tried, but you have to work through the Ngonyama Trust Council, which is run by Justice Ngwenya, and there are too many vested interests. If you've got a lot of money
Mm,
and you could get directly to the king, then there were ways of getting tradable security out of the king. But how to do it for the ordinary person is a completely different story because it's the kind of leases or the PTOs that they have now or leases that they want to bring in are ways of raising money or good cash. But there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't have a system where the king would still get money if people had title deeds. I mean, it would be like any local municipality.
right. And again, to the king, and look, I don't know much about the internal politics of Zululand, but it is in his own interest to give people title deed because it's one of the areas in the country with the highest levels of poverty, literacy, all the social problems, you name it. And title can alleviate those problems.
The
Um,
other thing is the degradation of the land.
yeah,
People
the
don't talk
erosion.
about that. But as a farmer, when you drive through and you see how the land gets degraded because there's no title,
Mm,
and title is not a magic bullet, but title gives you the right to look after your piece of ground. And
Well,
then
but
the
people
econometrics,
act more responsibly when they've got title, and the thing is,
absolutely.
it's
But
collateral for the banks. You know, you're gonna farm properly because you lose your land. You know, it's
absolutely. No, and you can also you can make more money out of your land. If you've got better cattle that calve once a year, I
mm,
mean, imagine the difference between improving your calving percentage by 100%.
yeah, it's double your income. You know, assuming the price stays the same. You know,
Yeah, it's so easy. It's another no-brainer. Why can't we see it?
yeah. So then somebody asks, how long do you have to occupy land before applying for title?
All we require is if you have if there's a utilities account in your name
Yeah.
and you have the permission to occupy a property, whether it's been for 6 months or for 25 years, that according to Ultra to start with, that gives you the right to the ground, and that allows us to transfer the land. And remember, we're not transferring the land; the municipality is signing it off to a certain person, to a recipient. We're not
Right.
deciding who the recipient is.
So you're not playing judge, jury, and
No, no,
executioner
no.
here.
We are not gatekeepers. Never.
No.
It's the
Right.
last thing we do.
Right. That's very important. You know, otherwise it's going to be politically chaotic. You know,
No,
you cannot.
nobody can ever come to me and say, "Why don't you give me a title deed?"
Right.
It's not in our power to do so.
Mhm.
If that person must come with a permission to occupy or a right to reside. They prefer the word right to reside now. And if you've got a right to reside, it's fine. It's then we can pass the title deed, because
Okay.
then the municipality, the officer who's designated, will then sign the form off saying that we can transfer the ground.
Okay.
We can't we can't just transfer the ground.
Yeah. So you basically facilitating the process of
That's
recitation.
exactly the word. We facilitate. We've got a sponsor who gives us the money.
Mm.
We've got a municipality that has the power, that owns the ground, and we facilitate the process to give the resident the title deed.
Right.
And we become experts at it. As Leon would say, we are the experts. I always argue with him. We're the only reason we're the experts is because nobody else does it.
Yeah. That's well. I mean, you're the first. You're the entrepreneurs or the socialpreneurs or whatever they call it these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're very proud of what we've achieved. It's every presentation that we go to, every handing over ceremony we go to, is a new experience. It's just uplifting.
And I imagine also traveling the country and getting to know it on that level is you learn a lot about South Africa.
But you learn a lot about how many good people we've got in this country. How many
Right.
people that we think municipal officials we speak scathingly about how incompetent they are. There are some, but there are so many that are good, honest people and that are trying their damnedest to
Mm.
create a better country. And we have sponsors on the same basis. Sponsors who, who don't make conditions, just make a better country. And how do we do it? We do it with title deeds.
Right, that's one step. Perry, I don't think I want to take any more of your time. I just want to say to the audience as well, look, I don't tell people where to put their money, but, the Khaya Lam project is one worth supporting, and I do believe that this is the solution for the land problem. It's probably not going to solve all the historical issues. I mean, let's not be naive about it, but it's definitely going to help alleviate the dire strains of poverty we see in South Africa. And it's, as you said, it costs next to nothing, 2,600 Rand per title, which people can sponsor if they want. But more importantly, I think people need to start talking about it and, talk about it among yourselves, because when people start talking, that's when the politicians listen. Politicians are not going to listen when you knock on his door and say, do this. He looks at the media and the polls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The more pressure there is from the bottom, the more the politicians will listen.
Yeah. But Barry, in the last few seconds, what do you want to say to the audience before we sign off?
No, there's only one thing I want to say is that I do this because I
Mhm.
believe in our country. I'm a proud South African,
Mhm.
and and as I said right in the beginning, that the if I can help create a prosperous South Africa, I'm helping the future of everybody else's children and grandchildren, and I think that's got to be the biggest selling point I could ever have.
Yeah. Perry, thank you very much. Highly appreciate it.